At a time like this, I strongly believe, and have a feeling the Chancellor does too, that we now need to be incentivising business both to remain in and to enter the United Kingdom. We want to be ensuring that business does well and pays lower taxes. But I'm joined by a particularly distinguished Professor of Economics at King's College London and former Chief Economist at the Cabinet Office, Jonathan Portes, and you broadly support the corporation tax hikes. You don't have the fear that I do that they will discourage investment in this country.
Well, remember that the Chancellor, at the same time as continuing with the corporation tax hike, which of course Rishi Sunak announced a couple of years ago, so it's not new, it's just implementing what was already decided, he has introduced what's called full expensing for investment. What that means is that you can, if you invest, you can write off the value of that investment against your profits 100% in the first year. And actually, on balance, that ought to mostly outweigh the disincentive to invest that comes from having higher corporation tax. So it's not ideal. Of course, we'd all like a lower tax burden for business, but I think he's gone quite a lot of the way towards repairing the potential damage to investment that the hike would otherwise have done. So it's at least a glass half full rather than completely empty.
The answer that I would give to that, or the challenge I'd give to that, is the increase you got in tax take when the reverse was done, when George Osborne got rid of the write-offs but reduced the rate very significantly. And the GDP share of corporation tax went, I think, from 2.3 to 2.9%. So it was a big GDP increase in corporation tax.
It didn't change very much from the previous trend. And most of the estimates we have from that period suggest that the tax changes made a pretty marginal difference. And you see, I mean, it's the evidence of that period that the OBR is incorporating in what they're saying today about what today's tax changes will mean on corporation to investment. And it doesn't make a huge amount of difference. These things matter, but they don't matter that much. And I'm afraid to say, you know, what we have, the big evidence, I'm afraid, of the last 6 or 7 years is that things like uncertainty and the cost of Brexit actually have a more damaging impact on investment than the headline rate of corporation tax, because what the OBR says is we've now got pretty clear evidence that Brexit has reduced investment, and that's one of the reasons why the growth forecast going forward is so dismal.
There's also been a COVID pandemic and other things. But
but that's what you get that by looking at comparing us to other countries. It's not about COVID.
Well, that seems to have had quite a big impact, and the UK is a particularly open market, though we came out of it earlier thanks to not being in the European Union and getting ahead with our vaccine. But to go back to corporation tax, if you look at the Irish experience, there were figures out fairly recently, I saw them today, that corporation tax raises more money in the Republic of Ireland than VAT at 12.5%. Doesn't this make you think that actually having a very low rate could be significantly beneficial? Bear in mind, as you know, the Republic of Ireland has a very similar VAT regime to the one in the UK.
Well, I mean, the Republic of Ireland has become very successful in getting particular types of large, mostly US multinationals, especially pharmaceutical companies, some IT companies, to set up and to route their profits via Ireland. I don't know anybody who thinks that you know, that is a large part of the Irish miracle and the Irish economic model within the EU. I don't think anyone realistically thinks that is viable for an economy the size and structure of the UK. Even if we'd stayed in the EU, let alone being outside of it, it's just not going to happen.
But if it would attract international investment, get money flowing through, and corporation tax is ultimately falls on individuals, doesn't it? Because the companies charge prices and employ people, and that a corporate structure will be interested in its net margin rather than its gross margin. So if you increase the tax burden, it will have to increase its prices or reduce its employment. So the economic effect is quite a direct one.
That's right. I mean, ultimately, the taxes are paid by people, although, of course, part of the burden of corporation tax falls on people who own shares and get dividends as well as employers. But broadly, you're right. Companies don't pay tax. Households and people pay tax. So there is no free lunch here. On that, you're absolutely right. But equally, I think that while putting up the rate of corporation tax isn't going to be beneficial to the UK economy. I don't think anyone would suggest that. The downside impacts of doing that at the same time as raising the tax, improving the tax treatment of investment, improving R&D tax credits. I don't think the Chancellor has actually done a bad job here with the difficult hand that he's been given. The alternative being, is to increase tax on people somewhere else, right?
Well, except if you're taking with one hand and giving back with the other, the net effect isn't enormous. And the question, I suppose, is it better, which I would argue it is, to have a simple tax system with low rates and few write-offs, or should you have a more complicated system with higher rates but lots of way of getting that rate down?
I mean, I think overall I'd agree with you. The evidence is less clear for corporation tax. There is some evidence you are better, a simple system is better, but one with relatively high rates and more generous write-offs does appear to produce at least as good results, looking at the international evidence. But more broadly, I think you raise an important point about the overall tax system. People complain about taxes being too high. I don't actually myself think they are too high for the structure of economy we have, but we have hugely overcomplicated the tax system, and that's a bipartisan point under government.
That is a great point on which to end, and a point of agreement.